Okay, hello again. Let's continue with solving quadratic equation. This section specifically focuses on factoring, but let's do a quick review from last section, just solving any type of a factoring, very simple ones. So I just put an equation up here that doesn't look like a quadratic, but it is. But remember, you have to do the distribution. You have to expand everything and collect like terms, put them in a quadratic form, and then solve. So I'm going to do that. You want to pause the video and you go ahead, do this. Make sure that you're doing the distribution correctly and then bring everything together and then we'll continue. Okay, so the next step. So this is the expansion of both sides, left side and right hand side. That's what we get. Now we are going to bring collect like terms, all x's squared and the x terms and numbers. We're going to bring them all together, or you can set them equal to 0. It doesn't matter. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so when you polish this, you notice that every 2x squared and x squared, you bring them together, that gives you 1x squared. 6x minus 6x, that's 0. And then I just moved it 4, so I subtracted from both sides, so we got the final equation is x squared equal to 4. So here it is, x squared equal to 4, and at this point you want to take, remember, the square root of both sides. What number times itself will give you 4, and there are two possibilities. x1 is positive 2, x2 is negative 2. And that's it. And you can go ahead and check your answer, and you notice that it is correct, but that's what you would do. All right, very simple quadratic equation. Great, that's a good question for the review. Let's move on to the new part by solving the quadratic equation by factoring. Before we go ahead and talk about the factoring method of solving quadratic equation, we need to make sure that we know what the zero product rule is. So here's the zero product rule. It says that if you have two things multiplying together, so if you have a times b, so this is, by the way, a times b, that's what that is, and if the answer to this, when you multiply them, you get 0, what you can say is that either a must be 0 or b must be 0, or both of them can be 0. Okay, both equals to 0. Okay, that is a very important rule that you need to remember. Okay, so it's called the zero product rule. So when you have two things to multiply, the answer, the product of that is 0. One of them must be 0 or both of them must be 0. And we're going to use this concept to go ahead and use the factoring to solve quadratic equations. Okay, so here is an example. X squared minus 3x plus 2 equal to 0. It is a quadratic. We need to solve that. Now, we can't notice that because we have a middle term, the linear term, and a constant term that is not 0, this cannot be solved very easily. So we have to go ahead and factor. But we do know how to factor this from last year, from grade 10 and earlier chapters in this course. So we need to go factor that, and to put it in a factor form, x squared minus 3x plus 2. So let's rewrite that. What is that equal to? Well, that is actually, let's do this, right? So two numbers you multiply, you get 2. You add them, you get negative 3. So they both must be negative, and you factor that trinomial on top. That becomes that factor form, x minus 2, x minus 1. Now set it equal to 0. Now we just change the format of this equation, the quadratic equation, into a factor form. And that's very useful because now we can use this rule, the zero product rule. This guy right here, that's what we're going to use now. So what we're going to do is that we say, okay, either x minus 2 must be 0, because that's one term, one bracket. 0 times anything, 0 times x minus 1, that makes it 0. Or the second bracket must be 0. X minus 1 must be 0, because is x minus 1 0, 0 times x minus 2 will make it 0. And now we can go ahead and solve these two linear equations, which we know how to do that since grade 6, and then we solve. So here here's the first answer, x equals to 2, and let's call it x1, and then second part, x2 is equal to 1. And that is perfect because you can check and you can see that it is true. Now if you put x1 for both of the x's on top, because that's the same value, so 2 minus 2, if you put 2 in there, that becomes 2 minus 2, that's 0. And what is 2 minus 1? That's 1. What is 1 times 0? That's 0. So you can easily see that in this case 0 times 1, that's equal to 0. Great. You can do the same thing with the check for the x2 equal to 1, and you notice that the second bracket is 0, and that is it. Okay, that is basically how you do this. Now we're using, this is a simple factoring, but it can get a little bit more complicated in terms of factoring, where the coefficient of the quadratic is not 1, and we know how to factor that because we learned it last year in grade 10 or earlier in this course. Great. Look at the example B. 4y squared plus 2y plus 9 equal to 0. This quadratic doesn't have x, it has y instead. Who cares about the variables as long as it's got a power of 2 and follows the rule? That is a quadratic equation. Let's go ahead and factor that. Now in this case you may want to do the either the column factoring, or you can do the freestyle factoring. Whatever you decide to do, it doesn't matter. So 2y and 2y, that will give you 4y squared, and then because you have the 3 in there, the only way you can get the 9 in here, this is the 9 constant term. That means that whatever in here is, these two, when you multiply them, you must get 9, and the only way would be 3 and 3, because if you put 9 and 1 in there, that will get too many y's after you starting to expand the two brackets. And because they're all positive, we add both, and that's what you will get. It just turns out that both of these two brackets, they are equal to each other. Great. We're going to follow the zero product rule. So either 2y plus 3 equals to 0, or 2y plus 3 equal to 0. Now that's silly because we're repeating that, but I just want to make sure that you see that. You write it down every time, but in this case they're both the same, so if you solve for one of them, you're done. So let's go ahead and solve for y. So 2y equals to minus 3, and y, solving for y, getting rid of the coefficient of 2, and so final answer, y is equal to negative 3/2, which is the same as this answer because it's the same equation. And again, you check your answer, and that would be it. So that's how you solve this. Now again, how do we do the factoring? You have to remember your factoring technique. However you decide to do it, either you're doing it through the column, or they call them Chinese method or Egyptian method, whatever the method that you've learned, or you just do a freestyle. Factor it properly, and then once you have it, follow the zero product rule and come up with the answer.